Here's something nobody prepares you for.
It's pulling us in!
The moment you stop explaining yourself,
Fight it!
stop defending your intentions, stop reacting to every jab, every tone shift, every subtle disrespect, and you simply disappear, that's when everything changes. Not in a loud, dramatic, social media announcement kind of way, but quietly, strategically, permanently, because nothing destabilizes a fragile ego more than losing access to someone they thought they had secured. It's not arguments that shake people. Arguments give them engagement. It's not revenge. Revenge still proves you care. It's not even closure. Closure gives them a final word. It's access, your attention, your energy, your predictability, your emotional availability. When someone knows they can reach you anytime, trigger you anytime, get a reaction anytime, they feel powerful. But the second you become unreachable, no explanations, no dramatic exits, no "this is why I'm leaving" speech, just absence. Now the dynamic shifts because control depends on response. Ego depends on reflection. Power depends on access. And when you remove access without warning, you introduce uncertainty.
Yes,
Uncertainty
finally!
is
Whoa,
uncomfortable.
what happened?
It's over!
Uncertainty
But how?
creates doubt.
Just like that.
Doubt cracks ego. Suddenly, they're replaying conversations, questioning their behavior, wondering what changed. You didn't yell. You didn't fight. You didn't threaten. You just stopped participating. And that's the move nobody talks about, because the strongest position you can take is the one where you no longer need to be understood, validated, or chosen. You simply step back. And in that silence, you don't just walk away, you rewrite the power structure completely. Most people misunderstand ego. They think it's loud, arrogant, boastful. But real ego isn't always obvious. It's subtle. And at its core, ego is about control. It feeds on response. Not love, not logic, not truth. Response. Your
What is
replies, your emotional
It's pulling
shifts,
us in!
your attempts to explain yourself,
Fight it!
your need to be heard, your effort to fix what you didn't break. Every time you react, you reinforce someone's sense of influence over you. When someone can trigger you with a comment, they feel powerful. When they can upset your mood, they feel significant. When they can predict exactly how you'll respond, they feel in control. And control is intoxicating. It reassures the ego that it still matters, that it still has reach, that it still has leverage. That's why some people provoke, why they test, why they push boundaries just enough to get a reaction. Because even a negative reaction is still proof of access. Anger, access, defensiveness,
I
access,
can't believe you did that.
long emotional
What?
explanations,
It's not a big deal.
access.
Not a big deal. It affects
But when
everyone.
you disappear, no argument, no paragraph-long message, no final emotional monologue, just silence. Now the ego has nothing to grab onto, no resistance to push against, no emotion to manipulate, no predictable pattern to exploit, and that absence creates discomfort, because without your reaction, they lose confirmation of their importance. Silence removes feedback. Silence removes leverage.
Oh, no.
Silence
Whoa,
removes
are you okay?
control.
Ouch, my
And
back.
when ego
I'll
loses
get help.
control, it doesn't feel indifference, it feels fear. That's why your calm withdrawal is so unsettling. Not because you attacked, but because you stopped participating. And for someone who feeds on reaction, nothing is more terrifying than being ignored. Most people make noise when they leave. They announce it, they dramatize it, they deliver speeches. "I'm done. You'll regret this. I deserve better." But that's not detachment, that's negotiation disguised as strength. It's a final attempt to be understood, to be validated,
Yes,
to be
finally!
chased.
Whoa,
True
what happened?
detachment
It's
doesn't
over.
perform.
But how?
It
Just
doesn't
like
demand
that.
attention on the way out. It shifts quietly. It's when you stop replying instantly, stop feeling obligated to explain every boundary, Stop over-clarifying your tone. Stop volunteering emotions to people who mishandle them. Stop trying to prove your worth. Stop trying to be chosen by someone who keeps hesitating. And instead, you simply withdraw. No dramatic goodbye, no emotional paragraph, no one last conversation, just a steady reduction of access. Your availability decreases, your reactions disappear, your emotional exposure closes, not out of bitterness, out of awareness. And here's why that's powerful. When you argue, people defend. When you accuse, people counter. When you threaten to leave, people negotiate. But when you quietly remove yourself, there's nothing to fight, just space, and space creates reflection because
Oh no! What happened
absence
to you?
highlights
to
what
help,
presence
I'm coming!
normalized.
Hold on!
Please
When you
be
were always
okay.
there, they didn't measure your value. When you were predictable, they didn't feel your impact. But the moment access disappears, the contrast becomes undeniable. Your silence becomes louder than your words ever were. Your distance becomes heavier than your anger ever could be. Because when something consistent suddenly stops, the mind pays attention, and in that silence, value becomes visible. Not because you forced them to see it, but because you finally stopped trying to convince them. Human nature has a blind spot. We don't appreciate consistency. We adapt to it, your attention, your loyalty, your steady effort, your emotional availability. When it's always there, it stops feeling special. It becomes expected, automatic, background noise, like air in a room. No one notices it until it's gone. The moment you remove that consistency without warning, something shifts in the brain. The nervous system goes on alert. What changed? Did I push too far? Why aren't they responding? Why don't they seem affected? Silence interrupts the pattern, and when a pattern breaks, the mind scrambles to restore it. That scramble is psychological discomfort. It's called cognitive dissonance, the tension that happens when reality no longer matches expectation. They expected you to explain, to react, to defend, to chase resolution. Instead, they got nothing. No anger to fight, no emotion to manipulate, no predictable script to follow, just silence. And silence is unsettling because it offers no clarity.
Get back!
It
It's
forces
coming down!
internal
Woohoo,
reflection,
look at that!
especially for someone who believed you would always stay, always tolerate, always respond. Your absence challenges their certainty, and certainty is what ego depends on. You don't have to insult someone's pride. You don't have to win an argument. You don't have to prove your value. You just stop feeding the dynamic because ego, like any system, depends on supply. Supply of attention, supply of reaction, supply of reassurance. When that supply disappears, the system destabilizes, and when the ego can't regain control, can't trigger a response, can't reestablish access, it doesn't feel indifference, it feels panic. Not because you attacked, but because you walked away quietly, and now they have to sit alone with the silence you left behind. Let's be clear about something. Detachment is not cruelty, it's clarity. Coldness comes from resentment. Detachment comes from awareness. It's the moment you realize you don't have to attend every argument you're invited to. You don't have to defend boundaries to people who repeatedly cross them. You don't have to stay in spaces where you're merely tolerated instead of genuinely valued. That's not being harsh. That's being self-aware. Silent detachment says, calmly and internally, I see the pattern, I see the disrespect, I see the imbalance, and I choose peace, not chaos, not revenge, not one last emotional showdown, peace. It's not about punishing someone for how they treated you. It's about protecting your energy from being mishandled again. Because once you recognize a pattern, staying, becomes participation. And growth sometimes looks like distance. Protection doesn't require a press release. It doesn't require a dramatic speech. It doesn't require validation from the very person you're stepping away from. Real detachment is quiet, it's composed, it's grounded, and it moves without asking for permission. Not because you stopped caring, but because you finally started caring about yourself. Fragile egos depend on certainty. They need reassurance that no matter how they behave, you're still there, still caring, still available, still emotionally reachable, even when they dismiss you, even when they disrespect you, even when they give the bare minimum, because as long as you remain accessible, they feel secure. But when you disappear without warning, that certainty shatters. Suddenly they lose emotional leverage. They can't trigger you to prove they matter. They can't guilt you into staying. They can't twist the story
You broke
if you're
the
no
mirror.
longer
It was
participating
an
in it.
accident.
7 years
And
bad
that
luck.
loss of control is destabilizing. Your silence becomes a mirror. Without your reactions to distract them, without your emotions to manipulate, without your explanations to debate, they're left alone with their own behavior. And that's uncomfortable because sometimes the hardest thing for someone to face is not your anger, it's their reflection. When you stop absorbing the impact of their actions, they finally have to carry the weight of them. And for a fragile ego, that weight feels heavy. Here's the part most people avoid. You can't fake detachment, you can act distant, you can delay responses, you can pretend not to care. But if deep down you're hoping they notice, hoping they panic, hoping they chase you, that's not detachment, that's strategy. And strategy still depends on their reaction. Real silent detachment begins internally. It happens the moment you no longer need validation from the
did
very
it. It's
person
breaking
who
apart.
withheld
Yes,
it.
but what is that cloud?
The moment
It's
you
spreading
stop
so
craving
fast.
We have to
closure
stay back.
from someone who thrives on confusion. The moment winning the argument stops mattering more than protecting your peace. That's the shift. You choose dignity over drama, peace over proving your point, distance over dysfunction. You stop trying to be understood by someone committed to misunderstanding you, and something powerful happens when that internal shift locks in. Your behavior changes naturally. You don't have to force silence. You don't have to rehearse indifference. You don't have to post cryptic messages or send subtle signals. There's no performance because your nervous system isn't hooked anymore. You're not waiting. You're not checking. You're not calculating outcomes. You're simply done negotiating your worth. And when that internal decision is real, your external presence becomes effortless. No dramatic speeches, no emotional finales,
Whoa!
no
Are you
passive-aggressive
okay?
energy,
Ouch, my back.
just
I'll
calm
get help.
distance, not cold, not bitter, not reactive, grounded. And that grounded silence is powerful because it doesn't seek impact. It simply moves on. When you reach that level, disappearing isn't a tactic. It's alignment. And alignment doesn't need applause. It just walks away. When you truly disappear, 3 predictable things usually happen. First, they test the silence. A random, hey, a subtle reaction to your story. A casual check-in that pretends nothing changed. It's not coincidence. It's a probe. They're checking if access is still available. Second, they act unbothered publicly because ego hates appearing rejected. So they post more, smile louder, perform indifference. But performance is often a cover for uncertainty. Third, they think about you more than before. Not because you argued, not because you begged, not because you made a scene, but because the brain fixates on what it can't access. Unfinished patterns create mental loops, and your silence becomes the unanswered question. But here's the key. Your power is not in whether they react. Your power is in not needing them to. If you're watching for their response, you're still attached to the outcome. Silent detachment isn't a tactic to trigger regret. It's self-respect without negotiation. It's deciding that your peace matters more than their reaction. And when you reach that point, you don't disappear to make a statement. You disappear because you've already made a decision. The strongest move you'll ever make in life isn't raising your voice. It isn't crafting the perfect comeback.
Yes, finally!
It
Whoa,
isn't
what happened?
proving your
It's
point
over.
so
But how?
flawlessly
Just like that.
that no one can argue with you. And it definitely isn't trying to crush someone else's ego. Real power looks different. It's walking away so completely that your absence speaks louder than your anger ever could, because anger still shows investment. Arguments still show attachment. Long emotional explanations still show access. But calm, permanent distance, that shows self-control. Disappear without warning, not to hurt them, not to punish them, not to make them panic, not to play psychological games. But because you've understood something most people never learn, access to you is a privilege. Your time, your energy, your emotional depth, your presence. None of that is automatic. And when someone mishandles that privilege, when they take your consistency for granted, when they mistake your patience for weakness, you don't argue your value, you don't beg for respect, you don't demand awareness, you remove access silently, strategically, permanently, no dramatic exit, no final speech, no emotional debris left behind,
Oh no!
just a
What
shift.
happened to you?
And that
We have to
shift
help, quick!
changes
I'm
everything.
coming! Hold on!
Because
Please be
silence
okay.
forces reflection. Silence creates space. Silence transfers weight. Suddenly they feel what you used to carry. And that kind of quiet confidence, it breaks fragile egos more effectively
Yes,
than
finally!
shouting
what
ever
happened?
could.
It's over!
Not
how?
because you
Just like
destroyed
that.
them, but because you stopped making yourself available to be diminished. That's the real power. And once you understand it, you'll never need to explain your exit again.